Good afternoon. We'll go ahead and get started right on time. Thank you everybody for coming today. I'm delighted to have with us Mary McComb. Mary has worked in correctional facilities since 1985. She is a graduate of William Mitchell and is licensed to practice in Minnesota. Her current position is at the Stillwater facility as an associate warden, and she uses her legal training to develop policy and provide training. Mary has been tracking sovereigns in DOC facilities since 2002, so she's got a lot of really good experience to share with us today. So please help me welcome Mary.
Thank you. How's the volume? So I am a very relaxed presenter. You can ask questions anytime you have them. I will try to, due to our circumstances, to stay close to the mic and the camera and not walk around as much as I usually do. So how many of you have had a bogus lien filed against you? Show of hands? No? Am I the only one? 3.6. Okay, that was filed against me in 2002 by an inmate at Moose Lake Correctional Facility. The lien was ultimately removed in 2006, so that was a protracted process. And since the department's experience, now there is a criminal statute and there is a civil statute that helps people respond to these liens. But that was the start of my interest in the sovereign citizen movement, because the Commissioner of Corrections, and I was working in the legal department there, was receiving a lot of nonsensical paper. So how many of you received nonsensical sovereign type paperwork? Okay, yep, so that is fairly common, and the process that sovereigns use is designed to bog down the court system. And since we have quite a few sovereigns who use that language in our lawsuits that we face and defend at the Department of Corrections, it's kind of, I was going to say entertaining, and that's not the proper word, but to see courts respond to these arguments, how far do they go down into the merits of what this person is alleging, and then it's nice to see them summarily dismissed so that on our end we don't have to spend a lot of time, responding to frivolous suits. But what we'll talk about today is the origins of the sovereign movement, and there's been a huge amount of sovereign activity very recently. So this is a PowerPoint that I've been updating constantly. We will look at the sovereign activity that exists in Minnesota, and in particular, all of my documents are confiscated from criminals inside our correctional facilities, and that's a very convenient way of doing research. Saves me a lot of time. So you'll become familiar with the various sovereign theories, learn how to recognize paper terrorism, understand, we'll talk a little bit about sovereign tax evasion and the debt avoidance, and then some of the identifiers and documents that you may see submitted to your office. And then in case we don't get to the end, I put my phone number and email address up here, and I do have business cards. I kind of collect sovereign inquiries because there's just, you get stuff like this, who do you call? So within corrections and sometimes law enforcement, I've just served as a resource. So if you have questions, just get my attention, or however the webinar people do that. And I will pause for those, but we'll just start with a video that kind of explains some of the background. Okay, we're going to try the video thing. So we don't, oh, something's muted.
They belong to a movement the FBI warns can create homegrown terrorists. So who are these people and what do they believe?
Well, not all of them are that extreme. ABC 15 investigator Joe Ducey found some live right here in the valley. They could even be your neighbors. They don't like taxes.
The way that the government has set things up is that we're really enslaved.
They don't like being told what to do.
We don't have our constitutional rights anymore.
But unlike the Tea Party protesters, people like Jonathan, who lives in the East Valley, are acting on their beliefs in what some might consider an unusual way.
I have a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, as does everyone. And so the way the system is set up, they're taking that away.
Filing paperwork to become what's called sovereign, trying to declare themselves U.S. nationals rather than U.S. citizens.
I empathize with their frustrations, just don't know that this is the best way to respond to it.
Arizona Secretary of State Ken Bennett says his office gets about 8 to 10 so-called sovereign citizen applications like these every week from people across the state.
It's not about revolution. It's not about hating my country or my government. It's about loving my country, and I hope that people would join in.
For Jonathan and others who follow this philosophy, being sovereign means following the U.S. Constitution word for word.
So if you get a traffic ticket, what do you feel you should do?
If I get a traffic ticket, I shouldn't get a traffic ticket.
I cannot imagine what their legal arguments are that have any coherence whatsoever.
ASU law professor Paul Bender says there's potential danger in citizens declaring themselves immune from the government.
It would mean to be total anarchy.
And that's why the sovereign citizen movement has caught the attention of the FBI. This notice, issued in April, says those involved believe they don't have to answer to any government authority, including courts, taxing entities, motor vehicle departments, or law enforcement. In some parts of the country, people have gone as far as declaring themselves diplomats, creating their own license plates, ambassador identification, and badges. The FBI connects its most extreme elements to domestic terrorism.
And there are people who get engaged in this warfare against the federal government, sometimes gets personified by the IRS, that simply are not well adjusted.
Larry Mackey was lead prosecutor in the Oklahoma City bombing case. Terry Nichols claimed he was a sovereign citizen.
It's people being, unfortunately, selfish to the point of putting themselves and their own family at risk.
They want to be sovereign, but they choose to use government mechanisms to declare their sovereignty.
Bennett says his office won't record this paperwork, instead sending back a form letter that the documents are ineligible for filing. That rejection doesn't change the view of another self-proclaimed Valley sovereign citizen.
King Bennett can turn it down or whatever he wants, but I already have my UCC filed under the state of Washington, so it was just a notice to him.
Okay, so do you have to pay taxes? Do you have to do all the...
I would not think so.
The sovereign citizen applicants we talked to say they do not believe in violence or separatism. Instead, they view themselves in the tradition of George Washington and Ben Franklin. I'm investigator Joe Duce, ABC 15 News.
Many of you are sounding off on this story tonight on abc15.com.
Okay, so that kind of gives a nice overview of the conflicting, nonsensical nature of sovereign theories. And so this is almost a very difficult class or PowerPoint to organize because they are so disorganized themselves. So I pull it together as best I can to kind of make sense out of stuff that just honestly makes no sense. But I can tell you from many lengthy conversations with those who are incarcerated, what I call the true believers as opposed to the wannabes, that they really are able to hold two conflicting logical arguments in their head at the same time, and it doesn't seem to bother them. So you just simply can't reason with them whatsoever. But the background of the sovereigns is really an anti-government movement. Many people are familiar with the posse comitatus, where the sheriff is the highest authority of the land. Those fellows were pretty active in the 1970s. The sovereign citizen movement grew out of that as kind of a splinter in the 1980s, and that relates to the farm crisis and repossession of farms and those kinds of things. Sovereigns are very loosely organized. They can't agree upon anything, and it's very hard for them to find three of them who believe exactly the same thing. And their theories go off in different tangents. But there was a resurgence of activity in 2009, and those incidents continue to rise. So the most recent one was I believe it's the Munger Wildlife Refuge out Arizona, Wyoming, one of those. Okay, thank you. Those fellows were sovereign citizens, so they continue to attract a lot of attention. So first we had the farm crisis in the 70s. That was the first wave of the sovereign movement. Then they petered off, and then in 2008 they came back up. They've got some nice theories about how you never have to pay any of your debts or bills, and that was very attractive around 2008. And as the economic and social conditions change in the country, the movement peaks and wanes. So you have the Ruby Ridge incident and the Weaver family in 1992. Waco, Texas, there was a standoff with the Republic of Texas, who is a sovereign organization. The law enforcement response to those incidents really continues to fuel the anti-government movement, primarily militias and the sovereigns. Now, sovereigns and militias are separate, but as we get into the common law courts that the sovereigns operate, you need a law enforcement branch, so you can always call on your militias or your oath keepers to go arrest people and execute your warrants. So there is a link, but they're not necessarily the same groups. As mentioned in the video, Terry Nichols declared his sovereign citizenship in 1992 to the DNR in refusing I think his was a hunting license. He refused to enter a courtroom in response to a game violation in 1993. So there was a lot of information about him before he ultimately became involved in the Oklahoma City bombing in '95. The Montana Freeman, which people remember, in 1996, we had the #2 Freeman incarcerated in Oak Park Heights, one of our facilities, for a while he was undergoing some of his federal trials. And then again, another Republic of Texas incident in '97. Then just recently we had the Bundy Ranch standoff in 2014. And that, so now I just did this training for the DNR because some of the conflicts between sovereigns and law enforcement are around game and wildlife issues. If you look at the patriot groups, you see kind of a trend related to our presidential selections, don't you? Which also coincides with economic conditions, but after the election of President Obama, a huge surge in militia and patriot groups. And I'm kind of interested to see how that all shakes out with the next election, as far as whether those numbers react to that or not. The incidence of violence is increasing. These are incidents that occurred between 2010 and 2014. There are a couple of little minor ones in Minnesota we'll talk about that didn't really rise to, armed conflict with law enforcement. So there are a couple of organizations. The Moors, that is a branch of sovereignty that is pretty distinct. It's comprised of African Americans, and they trace their heritage back to the Moorish peoples in the African continent, and they tend to be self-isolating. They don't mix because on the sovereign citizen front, a lot of those people come out of a white supremacist kind of movement, so the two do not mingle. But this group claims to have about 60,000 members. It's very confusing because there is a legitimate Moorish Science Temple religion, and not to be confused with the Moorish American National Republic. The Republic for the United States of America claimed to have 30,000 members. They have kind of decreased in membership. They run shadow governments in 38 states. I just kind of keep up on the news reports, and I saw that in July 2012, an actual state senator resigned her post in order to join the RUSA. This group fell out of favor when Tim Turner went to prison for a very long time for tax evasion. The Minnesota branch, we had one, started in 2010. They did serve paperwork on Governor Pawlenty. They kind of had a split in 2012. They peaked at about 500 members, but they did have a nice Facebook page that has since been taken down. So social media plays a role in how these people organize and communicate. Most recently, a new organization that's surfacing is the National Liberty Alliance. They are really focused on the common law grand juries. They have website and Facebook pages, and they list that they have common law juries active in 14 of our counties in Minnesota. So that's just a website I go back to periodically and see if they've started one in my county. So the common law grand jury process is that they just bring together citizens, they adjudicate what they call to be violations of people's rights, and they do issue warrants, arrest, seizure, they indict people, and then as I mentioned, if they need to enforce anything, they have the ability to tap into their resources in the militia and the Oath Keeper. And I'll give you some examples of, there's a very famous case here in Minnesota with Judge Montgomery. We do have a local law school, perhaps you haven't heard of. It's the Erwin Rommel School of Law, run by Peter John Simpson in Atwater. They publish a lot of the sovereign materials. And then David Wynn Miller out of Milwaukee, he authors a lot of stuff that was involved in Abby Gifford's shooting and Jared Lochner. So in 2008, we did have a common law venue that was a sovereign organization that set up a common law court. It issued an arrest warrant against a federal judge. They had plans to arrest her and bring her to a house where they would bring her before their citizen grand jury. That plot was discovered by listening to Robert Beal, we'll talk about him, listening to his phone calls. So 4 people went to prison over those threats. Now Mr. Beal was a millionaire, became a sovereign citizen, because the handy thing is, of course, you don't have to pay taxes, which is good if you have millions of dollars. He was sentenced for 11 years for tax evasion, but he eluded and fled under his bail and was arrested ultimately in Florida, where he had false identification that's issued by the Kingdom of Heaven. That's one of the sovereign references you sometimes see. So in addition to his tax problems, he received another 4 years for threatening Judge Montgomery. There was also a duo in 2010. So you can see this was a retired Minneapolis Police Parks officer. Seemingly normal mainstream people can get caught up in this movement. I'm not exactly sure how it happens, but he and his partner were charging primarily Somali immigrants $12,000 to teach them how to buy a house without getting a mortgage or paying taxes. We had a police officer in 2010 who was involved in that kidnapping case. He got 10 years in prison. We had a woman in Boyd, so they pop up in small communities sometimes, where she got pulled over and she presented her auto insurance, and it was run by a sovereign organization, and that was reported to the Department of Commerce, and they eventually told this organization, Embassy of Heaven, cannot sell sell insurance in Minnesota. In 2012, this man was arrested for speeding in Mower County. He refused to get out of his vehicle, which is a very common sovereign tactic. So they had to break the window and pull him out. Can you see his cuts? So he had a few injuries in that altercation, and he was driving around with his 13-year-old daughter in the car. So when I do training for law enforcement, we talk about being careful that there could be either armed maniacs in the back seat or little babies. You just never know. These 2 individuals out of Brooklyn Park came to prison for filing liens against Hennepin County prosecutor and other officials.
These are the Iversons, right?
Yes. Yes, these were very entertaining inmates for us to have. So as soon as they came to prison, they filed liens against the wardens of their facilities. So they got introduced into the sovereign process. while dealing with a home foreclosure, and caused huge, well, you can see 114 billion in bogus liens. A lot of paperwork to be on the receiving end of these kinds of things. In St. Cloud, just in 2014, they had a probation violator who was a sovereign. Now, a lot of times, because of the possibility that sovereigns will be armed, they do not approach the vehicle. They actually call a response team. This took 2.5 hours negotiation to get him out of his vehicle along with his female passenger. And then just most recently, with the shooting of the Black Lives Matters protesters, one of the gunmen is connected through social media as endorsing sovereign ideology. So just in the DOC, we started seeing liens popping up in 2002. In 2004, there were liens filed against department officials, and that wasn't receiving a lot of attention, but as soon as the governor got a lien, and the commissioners and some judges and some prosecutors, there started to get some more traction to respond to this concern. Ultimately, all of our liens were removed. One offender dragged the DOC commissioner into personal bankruptcy court in Duluth, and she had to appear and defend that on the merits. So they're pretty good at figuring out little loopholes in things. We have since made all of those documents contraband, and after the presentation, I have a number of booklets that have been confiscated. The redemption manual costs about $400 online. I've been building my own private copy. I have about 3/4 of it collected from various offenders. And primarily those come in legal mail because we search regular mail, and offenders are quite, it's not too hard to just put John Smith, attorney at law, in the sending and then send in whatever kind of contraband they want. So we try to catch it, but a lot of that comes in. Since 2010, we've been working with the FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force on tracking sovereigns' activities in prisons. So really what we're doing is trying to stop offenders from filing liens against us and you, because we don't really deserve that. We all know that we're very hardworking state employees and officials, and to have your job spill over into your personal life is a very uncomfortable, threatening situation. All right, so let's talk about what sovereignty is.
Mr. President, you've been a governor and a president, so you have a unique experience looking at it from two directions. What do you think tribal sovereignty means in the 21st century, and how do we resolve conflicts between tribes and the federal and state governments?
Tribal sovereignty means that, sovereign. You've been given sovereignty and you're viewed as a sovereign entity. And therefore, the relationship between the federal government and tribes is one between sovereign entities.
Okay, so that's about the depth of understanding that many of our sovereign offenders have about what it means when they declare sovereignty. Of course, it is completely distinct from what former President Bush is discussing, tribal sovereignty. These individuals are sovereign unto themselves. They don't belong to a tribe. They are their own country, their own sovereign entity wherever they go. But it is a confusing argument to try to help people understand. It's a mishmash of common law theories, of pre-constitutional America, the Uniform Commercial Code, and there's religion in there. And sovereigns advocate their position because you essentially take yourself out of any kind of financial transaction with the government or with a vendor or with a business, so you don't have to pay taxes, you don't have to pay your mortgage, you don't have to pay traffic tickets. And we will talk about the redemption theory, where we all each have a secret multi-billion-dollar account on reserve at the Treasury Department. So hopefully we'll get to that. And the big disclaimer, of course, none of this works and none of this is legal, right? So it sounds really too good to be true, but these guys don't believe that. So they have jurisdictional arguments, contract arguments. They've now branched off into administrative tort claims, and they commit tax fraud. So here's where their jurisdictional argument comes from, the 14th Amendment, and they've got an interesting read on it. So all citizens born and naturalized and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. So sovereigns simply claim, I do not subject myself to the jurisdiction of the United States. Kind of missing the part that, well, if you're born here, that's how it works. So they believe that the jurisdiction occurs at birth when you are issued a social security card, or if you get a driver's license, or if you are incarcerated and receive an inmate number, any kind of identifying number. If you accept that number, you have now subjected yourself to the jurisdiction of the federal law. And so they just simply say, I'm not accepting that jurisdiction. What they do is they reject all of these documents and send them to court and say, you know, and I have a ton of those that they send to the courts every day. You can't convict me of a crime because I am not a citizen. So how they do it, here's how they believe the steps of sovereignty work. You simply write a declaration of sovereignty. You record it with a county recorder. That's how they used to do it primarily. Now they use the Secretary of State, and they will record in Minnesota or any other state. And then they send copies. They make like 100 copies because it's their multi-purpose document, so they can send it to everybody. Here's one affidavit of sovereignty that we confiscated from an offender, Jerry Duenhoger. We're going to talk about him a couple of times because he is particularly persistent. And then here's another document where you can see that the thumbprint, it's actually typically red ink that they make their thumbprint on the document. They believe that that has significance. So their theory is, I've never been a U.S. citizen. They want to be regarded as resident aliens. They don't believe that any courts have jurisdiction over them because they have their own little common law courts they can go to. They also believe that they should have diplomatic immunity and that they should be treated as if dealing with a foreign country. So oftentimes we see correspondence to the U.S. Secretary of State to deal with their grievances. Now, one of the documents that they get from our Secretary of State is a document that verifies that a notary stamp is valid, but it really looks nice. So if you send an inquiry to the Secretary of State's office questioning, you know, whether this document was notarized by a valid notary, you can get, I'm not sure if they still issue these, but it does say the document is called diplomatic immunity, and so now by having this document that references that document, they think that makes their diplomatic immunity recognized. You did see some of the little ID cards. You can order these online if you need some. So now that they're sovereigns, they're going to use their own version of contract theory. And we talked about how the Social Security government pulls you into that contractual relationship. They believe that state and federal governments are really corporations, and that any interactions they have with state officials are existing contract law in their version of commerce. So they cite a lot of the Uniform Commercial Code, which I have to confess was not my favorite class in law school. I got what I thought. I never thought I would use it. Well, here you go. So my understanding does not match up with certainly the sovereign's version of the Uniform Commercial Code. But they believe that it preserves their commercial rights, so they cite that all the time when they are upset with government officials. This is a stamp in red ink that you might see if they don't have stamps like in prison. They have to write it out in red ink that they will write across documents and send it back to you and say, I reject this. I've seen a lot of guys get copies of their warrants of commit and criminal complaints and mail them back and say, and then they get mad He's like, well, you should be getting a call, Mary. They're going to let me out of prison. I said, no, this is not how it works. You can't just submit this into paper and they'll let you go. So they reject all of these various items. Here's a guy who's going to explain how the straw man works. And this is a YouTube video. He's a little bit softer spoken, so.
Hey YouTube, it's me again. Recently I've been looking into a little something called sovereign citizenship. Now I'm putting this in my solutions videos because I believe this may actually solve a lot of problems, more or less. I'll put a companion video to it, you'll see what I mean. What is sovereign citizenship? In short, a bunch of people have discovered that there are legal loopholes, and not just here, that's commoners as well, that you can drive a truck through. That's pretty much it. Now, stuff like, what is a person? Legally speaking, a person is actually a legal fiction. Anytime you see your name spelled with capital letters, all capital letters, not just capital lowercase the rest, that's a legal fiction. And technically it's like a raincoat. As long as you don't take off the raincoat, anyone grabs your sleeve can drag you around and make you do what you want. The sovereign citizens are people who found that your person is separate from yourself. So basically, if you're going to want to find out how to get around paying credit cards, mortgages, and a lot of other things without actually using money or having to work, you might want to look into sovereign citizenship. I know I am. Oh, that also gets around vaccines and a few other things. Have a good one.
Did that convince you? I like the raincoat analogy. I wish I had had that in law school when we talk about the corporate identities. And but he's trying to explain how the straw man exists and that there is a legal entity that is separate from our physical, biological, natural human being self. And the sovereigns call that the straw man. And that persona that is created by the government is primarily created out of the Social Security card. And it's represented anytime your name comes out in all capital letters, which happens in a lot of documents automatically, your driver's license and things like that. But the real me would be represented by not all capitals. So when they file a straw man lien, they file a lien against their corporate fiction, against their straw man. And this document becomes really the foundational document for all of the different bogus claims that they make against public officials. It's the way that they reclaim their straw man. And so they believe it protects against all debt collection. So Mr. Duenhager, my little buddy, has a lien filed against himself for, I forget how many trillions of dollars. And he says, I have a lien and I'm not going to pay restitution or my child support until I have paid myself back. And I said, but you just submitted it. It is filed. He's got a filing number. I said, that doesn't make it real. You still have to pay your restitution and your child support. But he will, every time we find a copy of it, we confiscate it. But he likes to have other people in the community send it to, he had a big dispute with the mother of his children over the whole child support part. Also, it registers a trademark on their name. So part of the lien that I received included $500,000 for every time I used the inmate's name when he wrote to me. So this is a straw man lien. This is Howard Ledden's straw man lien. Howard Ledden is one that follows the Court of Admiralty theories of sovereignty. So we had some staff who kind of called him the SS Ledden. But he has filed a lien against himself. It doesn't come through very well on this document. But the easiest way to tell a straw man lien is that the debtor and the secured party are the same person. This one is by Mr. Duenhoger. So the corporate fiction is the debtor. The real person is the secured person, is the secured party. That's how they believe that they make themselves sovereigns. The UCC-1 is filed with the Secretary of State. It is a lien. It is not a valid lien, but it is nevertheless filed, which offenders don't understand that distinction. In many states, so I've found liens filed in Illinois, Washington, Ohio, Wisconsin, all filed by Minnesota inmates. You don't have to live in any particular area to file a lien with any Secretary of State. So it gets a number, they get a filing receipt. This is Jerry's filing receipt. It really bothers him that all of the printing on here, his name is in all capital letters. I don't know how many times he wrote back saying, you have to print this out right, and of course the computer just can't do it. So now they can amend it. Once they filed that, they amend it. They add you as an additional debtor. So they just filed that amendment, the UCC-3, and a lien is placed on the additional person's personal property. This is a lien from Mr. S.S. Ledden that was filed against a judge in Ramsey County. These are all papers that we've confiscated in state prisons. And when we do, if we do find these paperwork, we will call you, okay? So don't worry that something's gonna, or if you get it in the mail, let us know. But we do always notify people so that they can check and make sure that a lien hasn't actually been filed. So valid liens obviously are consensual in that they relate to tangible things. Bogus liens are not consensual. Of course, I never agreed to have a lien filed against me. What I did was apparently not appropriately respond to the documents, which he interpreted as consent. I never actually owed the offender anything, and obviously you can't have a lien against yourself, so he can't add me to it. And only the government really can impose a involuntary lien. So now since 2006, it's a crime. It covers liens that are filed in order to harass and defraud. If filed against a judicial officer, a prosecutor, a sheriff, or a county recorder, it's a felony. I think that this law has been addressed. They might have added police officers to this one, to the felony category, but I think the rest of us are still gross misdemeanors. Not that that actually deters any true believers in any case. And then they created supposedly an expedited process to get the liens removed and the ability to impose fines and damages on the person who files the lien. But if you think about it, they're filing the lien because they have no money. So I'm not sure that that would result in any payment back. So just again, the steps, they write their declaration, they file it with the county. They also file those as an attachment to the UCC-1 that they send to the Secretary of the State. And once you do that, you are now a living and breathing man and a man upon the land. That's language that you hear sovereigns use. So how are they going to get money from us? Once they've filed those documents, they can claim that we violated their copyright, contract violations, the tort claims, and then we have false imprisonment claims that come from this also. So the first thing you look for in copyright violations are any documents with the copyright sign next to the inmate's name or the citizen's name. These are tactics, of course, used by non-inmates. They publish the copyright or the trademark notice in a newspaper. So Mr. Duenhoger and I have been working since about 2008. Last week, one of our retired officers found out that he published another copyright notice in a small town Wisconsin newspaper and took a photo of it, and I'm trying to gather the information because he has not ever filed a lien. He says he will never file a lien, that he is just simply trying to get out of prison. And my discussion with him has always been, he has hundreds of pounds of this paperwork that we confiscate, and because that's a fire hazard, we want him to be safe. So we confiscate this paperwork, he gradually accumulates it, and I told him that, I said, well, if Jerry, if you had all of the elements to make a bomb, but promised on a Bible that you were not going to make a bomb, I still could not let you have the bomb-making elements. And he just doesn't seem to understand why he can't have all of that paperwork, because he is one letter away from filing a lien on someone. So they get it published. Oh, and by the way, he suckered some poor person in the community to pay $900 for this ad. It has to be published for 4 weeks, and it is a half-page ad. So I have tried to reach out to this person that he has suckered in, but he's kind of a believer too. And I feel really bad. He actually came to the commissioner's office and was allowed to speak with an administrator. He explained that poor Jerry Duenhager had sent him so much paperwork that he stacked all the boxes in his garage, and his wife can no longer park in the garage. And he wants the department to let him out of prison, because this is just ridiculous. And I come away from that thinking, how come it's the wife's spot? How fair is that? He should park in the driveway. But yeah, it's stacked in copy boxes, and it fills a garage. And that's the paperwork that Mr. Duenhoger has worked on since about 2008. This is a notice of a copyright violation that the Commissioner of Corrections received from Mr. Ledden. Then, after we couldn't stop calling him by his name, so we got a cease and desist order from him that looked like that. And there's a warning, I'm going to sue you if you don't. My little notes on the side that say don't notarize, we realized that we were facilitating a lot of this paperwork because we were notarizing all their documents. So I train our notaries so that they refuse to notarize these. You can see next to his name, he does have a copyright. He has his financing statement listed and a lot of the UCC citations. The next step is to send an invoice. This is an invoice sent to a Ramsey County, 4th Judicial District. No, must be Hennepin County, right? For every day that he's been in prison, there's 2 things. One is the use of his name, and then there's the 2,833 days that he will be incarcerated on his sentence, and he is demanding $1.565 million per day on his false imprisonment claim. That case, Trezevant versus City of Tampa, Mr. Trezevant, I think it was a Mr. or a Ms., was arrested and held in custody for like 15 minutes, but something really bad must have happened during that 15 minutes because they gave that person a very large amount of money, which then the sovereigns multiply out to a 24-hour period and come up with the $1.5 million figure. So that's how much they get for every day that we keep them wrongfully in prison. So we received this invoice. Looks pretty intimidating, especially if you're just a corrections officer, a food service worker. You don't know really what's happening. And if you don't respond, they file a lien. Now, I can tell you on behalf of the commissioner, I did attempt to respond, but I did it wrong, and she got the lien. So, because there is no right way to respond, obviously. You just can't win on their battleground because they're nuts. This is Mr. Eilertson's lien that he filed against Warden Gao when he came to prison. So why doesn't it work? Obviously, we can't copyright our own names. How cool would that be? But it doesn't work. As I tell the inmates, not even Elvis Presley. Now I can use Prince. That's a more modern analogy. Even Prince cannot have a copyright on his name. The debt's not valid. I try to explain to these offenders, nobody owes you any money, so the lien is bogus. So then they have the breach of contract theory, and they will bring into contract any kind of oath of office. Sometimes these offenders will ask for your oath of office so that they can trap you in a violation of that. And then, of course, if we violate our oath of office, then we owe them money. They're vaguely aware of duties that we might have that are imposed by law or policy, or if we just don't give the inmate something that he wants. So the breach is The duty exists, the government official breached it, there are damages, and now we owe him money. So the first thing they send is an affidavit of truth. And you see those list the facts, which basically says, I am sovereign, I got arrested, I am not subject to the jurisdiction, you put me in prison, and it's a long list of the events that happened on their conviction. So obviously, if we respond, there's no way to do it correctly, so we get a notice of default. There's a sample of that. Another sample. Then you have an opportunity to cure, so you get 3 days to write them back. Notice how Mr. Duenholger had to switch to writing with a pen. We took away his typewriter, so it takes him a little bit longer. It's one thing we can do anyway. Then they sometimes have third parties serve these, and then they say, nope, we never received anything back from that person. And then since we didn't deny it, the allegations are true. And they cite this a lot. An unrebutted affidavit stands as truth. He who leaves the field of battle first loses by default. I just love that quote because I am often leaving that battlefield. So he simply puts together an affidavit that says, Mary didn't respond to me. And now he's got an affidavit that he can attach to his lien. He's all set to do it. So what he does is he sends a notice of the debt. He tells you you failed to pay. Here's one more chance, and then they can file the lien. So now liens, because they have become criminal, federal system, vast majority of states, they're now using administrative tort claims. Same documents, same process. Instead of stapling it to a UCC1, you staple it to a tort claim form. Again, they're asking for money damages. So this is the redemption manual. They had to update it, and they are now advising in the really tiny dense print, don't file a claim, file a tort claim. Or don't file a lien, file a tort claim. And now the expanded manual includes all the steps how to do that. These are documents that come out of the manual. They and you can get them on CD-ROM and just plug your own name into them. But you sometimes will see a flag stamp. They have to have a flag on certain documents, and that's a kind of tiny portable way to put a flag on something. So sometimes you see those stamps, and the stamp in the upper left-hand corner, you can purchase those on sovereign websites to stamp your documents and make them look official. And I was going to mention, so Mr. Duenholger has submitted a lot of paperwork to federal courts and to district courts. And you know how we stamp them, receive Court of Appeals, and that copy, when he gets a copy back of that, he loves that because he holds it out to me and he says, Mary, it's filed, the court accepted it. And I said, no, that's not what that stamp means. But you can see how particular these arguments get with these individuals. So there are a couple, as if that wasn't strange enough, there are a couple of stranger arguments. The maritime law argument has to do with the gold fringe flag. There's one in this room. And of course, as you all know, that means that we are in a court of admiralty. We are not in United States criminal or civil jurisdiction. So then when the sovereign comes into the room and sees that, he says, if this is the court of admiralty, I must be a vessel. And I am transmitting goods and services and commerce, but because they're sovereign right now, they're a foreign vessel. You have to follow the steps in this argument. And so I have a lot of paperwork where they explain in the court of admiralty that we are guilty of piracy because we have taken his vessel, which is him. And the price, amazingly, for piracy is the same as false imprisonment, which is the same as that $1.5 million a day. So sometimes there are some courts, and I'm not a maritime lawyer, that are based in New York. Our inmates correspond with them all the time also. So these documents may be directed also to the Secretary of State And you will see what they do to elude us is they put their criminal court case numbers on there or appellate court case numbers. For the vast majority of staff, it looks like a legitimate legal document. Lavelle Oates, he went into that very obscure part of shipping and lading and warehouse storage of the UCC, and it made sense to me, really. This was, I thought, much better than the Admiralty argument. So he believed that he was a package being stored by the commissioner, who was the warehouseman, and that he no longer wanted to be stored, so he demanded to be shipped to his home address, which we didn't do. He's still in prison too. Okay, just a word about redemption. This is that secret account that is established for you at your birth. It's called the Treasury Direct Account, and that represents the value of all of our earnings and contributions to society that occurred during our lifetime. And of course, how valuable are each of us? We are really worth billions and trillions each to our society. Same thing with the sovereigns. So when the government went off the gold standard, they now back their currency with the full faith and credit of the United States, which is really all of us working together to make a wonderful society. So the currency is backed by the value of all U.S. citizens, so why should we not get a piece of that pie? If you redeem your straw man, then you can draw on this account and pay off all of your debts, your mortgage. So a lot of sovereigns will explain, here's my Treasury Direct Account number, which is their Social Security number, and make their own checks out or submit these documents, these bonds, these drafts, and mail that to landlords and car companies and banks, those kinds of things. Then you send a notice to the Treasury Department that says, I satisfied this debt, please pay them off. And I have some documents where an inmate was trying to get a copy of his file, once again, from a court, and he sent the paperwork, and instead of doing the IFP, can you please send me a free copy, he just said, nope, the feds will pay for it, and submitted all the sovereign paperwork, which that didn't work. They didn't make him a copy of the file for that. So the sovereigns do spread their tactics through seminars, a lot of stuff on the internet. You can pay about, I have it in there, so if you would like to file your redemption and get your Treasury Direct Account, it only costs $1,600, but if you and your spouse want to do it, it's only $1,100. And of course, these people take that money and just disappear with it. None of that really works. Okay, so we have a couple of videos. YouTube is a wealth of information, but unfortunately, most sovereigns are so verbose, their videos are really long on YouTube. So it's hard to find videos that work for training. But here is this is a big favorite with my law enforcement classes. This is a sovereign who's appearing for a traffic ticket in court. Okay, just a second.
I don't have a last name. No.
What's your first name?
I don't have a first name either. I've got a name. My name is Robert. You can call me Robert. I'm not a person. See, you deal here with Admiralty Maritime jurisdiction, which deals with persons, which I am not.
What are you?
I'm a man.
Are you?
I'm a man, yes.
Are you a U.S. citizen?
No.
You're not a U.S. citizen?
I was not born in Washington, D.C. or any territory of the under federal jurisdiction, so no, I'm not a U.S. citizen.
Are you born in the United States?
I was born in America. Yes, I'm a state citizen of one of the several states. One of the several?
Which state?
Idaho?
Can I see your Idaho state license?
No, I don't have one.
You don't have one?
My person does, but I don't. And I don't wish to create joinder with you.
And if you want to...
Can I get your name, please? E. Smith, thank you. Are you a bailiff or are you a prosecutor? Oh, you're probably a bailiff. You got the ear thing in, huh?
Come on, folks. Have you heard Larry through? Not start off, you guys can have a seat over there.
I'm gonna go ahead and speak with the prosecutor.
Okay,
Excuse me.
Camera.
Excuse me. You're blocking my freedom of movement.
I am.
All right. Well, P. Barnes, you just admitted to me that you're violating my rights.
No, I'm not. You can't come in with the camera.
Well, you're violating my rights. And this is also freedom of the press. This is also freedom of the press. I mean, I don't know what the hell law book you're reading, man, but it doesn't apply to me.
You leave the camera with your mother outside the courtroom?
You are not God. You have no jurisdiction over me.
God's not worried about cameras.
All right. Well, why are you worried about cameras? Because you want to do something wrong? Because you want to do something wrong? Because if it's against the rules, that means it's because somebody intends on wronging somebody else because they're afraid of being held accountable. P. Barnes.
It's a nice speech, but you're still not coming in.
Well, I mean, I don't have to go in because you can't even issue a warrant for me.
Might as well leave.
Well, no, I'm going to go in there and I'm going to speak with the prosecutor.
You can go in there without the camera.
Well, please step aside. I'm going in.
No, you're not going in.
Don't touch me.
You're not going in, sir.
Let the record show that you just battered me.
Step back.
And you're using... Stop, please. I'm not doing anything wrong. Hey, you know what? You guys are really overstepping your bounds right now. Put the cuss on. Were you arrested me before?
Okay, so you can see how frustrating these individuals can be to deal with. That's, a lot of people feel some vindication at the end of that video. And I like the fact that this man was brought to court by his mom, you know, so he's part of a great special that they did with him, and he has 6 firearms at home that he regularly practices with, and law enforcement knows him and is very concerned about him, hence their ability to escalate in response to him. So he sounds crazy, but he could be dangerous. Here's a little court scene with a sovereign. The first thing, when the judge enters, they're going to say, "All rise," and you will hear him say, "Under threats, duress, and coercion," which is a sovereign thing. And this is the last clip that I have. So you can see a judge try to deal with their...
All rise. Under threat, duress, and coercion. Okay, have a seat. Okay, I think we've addressed everything. We're in the middle of something when I got the call.
Something else Mr. Shute brought up in regards to, I can't remember either.
All right, Mr. Shute. We were talking about, Mr. Shute wanted to read U.S. Supreme Court cases to the jury.
Yes. Reason being, since it's his job to prove that I'm a criminal, and I know that you and him are going to do everything you can to withhold evidence and facts, that I want to read United States Supreme Court cases, which pertains particularly to assault by a police officer or an illegal arrest, which is what an illegal arrest is an assault and battery. And then I would also like to read to them some U.S. Supreme Court cases in regards to licensing and traffic stops, and how how a judge would be in violation of his oath of office if he imposed a duty upon a licensee if the licensee was not acting for compensation. Okay. And that that's up to him to prove that the motor vehicle code does apply to me and that the cop did have reason to arrest me for failure to produce documents.
First, I've already ruled on those issues, and they are not jury issues. I will not allow you to read case law to the jury. It's inappropriate. The law will be, I am the judge of the law. I will instruct the jury on what the law is, and you've already been provided a copy of my first draft of that charge, and that would be the charge I intend to use. You have the right to argue based on the law applicable that other charges should be given, but I am the person who will instruct the jury as to the law. It is not appropriate for you to read cases to the jury, and I will not permit you to do so.
I object. You are not a judge. You are an executive administrator. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled there are no judicial courts in America. There have not been since 1789. Said judges do not enforce statutes and codes. Executive administrators enforce statutes and codes.
All right, we're done. And we'll see you tomorrow at 9:30 to go over the tape. I'm going to cover one other thing. I might as well cover it today, and that is, again, Mr. Shute has the right to disagree with any rulings I make. He has the right to take appropriate appeals. But Mr. Shute, it is inappropriate for you to address those issues to the jury. And I have to tell you that if you begin to do that once we get here, and if there's an objection, I will stop you. I will tell the jury that you've been instructed not to do so. I will tell them to disregard it. And if you continue to do that, I will then have no choice but to switch over, have Mr. Neal begin representing you, and I'm not going to permit you to create a mistrial by continually making inappropriate statements to the jury. And that's a choice you're going to have to make, but it's not my intent to allow the creation of a mistrial by continued statements that I've already ruled on. You have the right to go to the appellate division. If the appellate division overrules me, that's the law of the case. But until the appellate division does, my ruling is the law of the case, and that's the way we're going to proceed.
I object, and I move to mistrial now.
Okay, well, if your objection is overruled, then I note it. Have a nice day.
Okay, that's the end. Yes, sir.
Mary, my name is Bert Flagg. I'm a lawyer for the Secretary of State. So I just wanted to add a couple of things to your slides.
Oh, I welcome that.
The first thing is that there is a third remedy in law under section 545.05, which allows for expedited review of these bogus liens before a judicial officer, and in larger counties that could be a referee, doesn't have to be a judge.
So he pointed out that there is an expedited review process under, just so they got it on the
545.05.
545.05.
We do get not as many as Arizona's Secretary of State, but we do get those same kinds of documents. Some of them are quite creative. We have been instructed by the FBI locally not to respond. We do not respond. We have a special file for them.
Ah.
Very special file.
And that's, that's the interesting part on the law enforcement side. A lot of times they want to, and we are starting to see that now, they want to track these individuals. So how far do you track them before? That's always a dilemma. Those of us on our side, we're like, oh, let's just call them in and say, stop doing that. But they're like, no, we're investigating. We want to. So I understand why they would not want people to respond to those.
The UCC filings, I mentioned the Iversons before, we testified at that trial. We have seen some of the sovereigns use their UCC account as if it were a bank account number, and they issue, and this connects with the Admiralty, they issue site drafts, something that hasn't been used in 150 years, 200 years, to try to pay for goods and services. They've actually been successful, not in Minnesota, in Nebraska. Some implement dealer actually took one and sold a combine based on it.
Oh.
Combine rolled out the window, folks, out the door.
Yes, and he gave an example of someone in Nebraska who accepted a site draft from a sovereign, and they can make convincing looking documents. And of course with Quicken, anybody can print a check looking document, so there have been people defrauded.
The best one I ever saw was somebody made a license plate out of their UCC number.
Oh, yeah.
And
so yes.
I have a picture of it on the car. So.
Oh.
And lastly, talking about sort of some of the tip-offs, If you see correspondence coming in, before you open it, if you see it with brackets around the zip code, that is generally the sign of a sovereign. Or if you see colon before the last name of the sending party, those are signs of people who are followers of the sovereign movement.
Yes, we have a long list, and I can send it to Liz if people are interested, of those identifiers with the brackets around the zip code. I learned more about the zip code than I had before, researching why they objected to the use of the zip code. But the odd punctuation in the name, the UCC citations, the copyright sign, usually means you're in for some entertaining reading if you open that envelope. Any other questions? So I have my information up here. Also, I have a copy of the redemption manual, a really historical tome called Cracking the Code about the use of the Uniform Commercial Code to free yourself from debt and anxiety, and a couple of other materials that we've confiscated if you're interested in taking a look. And thank you very much for a great group.